But then, so when he asked Stephen Harper, he says, "Oh, whenever you talk about a coalition, it sounds negative." And Stephen Harper is allowed to essentially say
Yeah,
we see his fear mongering, just like to wrap this all together, just like that article of the constitutional scholar who said Michel Jean was scared of the PR machine. This is that PR machine that we're seeing. This is
exactly. The CBC, okay, cannot be distinguished from that PR machine, which is something I go back to again and again on this show.
right. And instead of calling him on it and saying, "Well, what about the Constitution?" He says, "Well, your friend David Cameron, he has a coalition," and it gives Stephen Harper
Yeah,
the chance
he
to
says,
say,
"Can you please explain why that's different than this? Why a coalition here is undemocratic, whereas other similar countries can have coalitions? Can you just please?"
which keeps the whole conversation in Harper's box. So
Yeah.
Harper gets to say, "Well, yeah, but he
Well,
had
thank
the
you for
most
that.
seats."
Yeah, thank you for that question, Peter. This gives me an excellent opportunity to explain why it's undemocratic here and perfectly democratic elsewhere, without
Right.
referring to our constitution, which is cut and dry. It
Yeah,
provides for
and Stephen
coalitions.
Harper just basically said that if he gets the most seats, then he has to be in the government of some sort. That if the other parties who have more seats in this case
Yeah,
would form a government, they don't even mention that they could have more seats. And it's kind of like an easy way of making Stephen Harper's a whole PR campaign acceptable.
yeah.
I mean, it's disgusting. That was horrible.
It just doesn't work like that. We should have had a coalition in 2008. Period. I would have loved it. And
Me
Stephen
too.
Harper's head would have been on a platter. The Conservatives would not have allowed him to retain the leadership had he rolled his government into a failure.
Stephen Harper is a person who it was always questioned, how can this guy ever become prime minister? And now, just as Peter Mansbridge pointed out, we're dealing with a guy who has been prime minister another how many more years has it been since that interview? He's past the point of he's been a prime minister longer than who was the prime?
Now we're pushing 7 years. No,
Yeah.
I think the remark from Peter Mansbridge was the longest serving minority prime minister was Lester Pearson, and Stephen Harper broke that record at 5 years.
Right. Was it John Diefenbaker? Who was it? He said
Lester B. Pearson.
Lester B.
Yeah,
Pearson. Okay, I got it right the first time.
good old Lester B.
Yeah. So I mean, the tone, the setting, the whole way that the conversation or the interview is constructed. You know, Peter Mansbridge is able to get away with looking like he's asking questions that are difficult, but he never puts the nails or the screws to Stephen Harper the way he did to Michael Ignatieff.
Yeah, there's two different ways that a journalist can handle it, and that handle the idea of touching on a difficult subject for his interview subject, right? One is to float the idea in the air and let the interview subject handle it. The other one is to drive that idea into the interview and not let the guy speak.
Right.
Right? So the two different things. Peter Mansbridge never gave Michael Ignatieff a full sentence in that whole interview. Right? But he just softly floated things into the air for Stephen Harper to deal with. And when Stephen Harper was done, then Peter Mansbridge asked his next question or responded in some way.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that people always need to remember too is you can be guaranteed that Stephen Harper would not enter into any interview, whether it be with a friendly person like Peter Mansbridge or anyone else he chooses to have an interview with, without knowing the questions first.
Right.
And unfortunately, I bet you that Michael Ignatieff was probably willing to enter into the interview as an interview. Like, okay, ask me questions.
Yeah, see, now certain people need to negotiate the content of their interviews in advance. Stephen Harper is definitely one of those. And certain people, it doesn't even occur to them because they're having conversations, you know what I mean, about issues of the day. And
I think we call
politics.
that being more open.
Yeah. Yeah. It would seem like for an intellect like Michael Ignatieff, for example, it would seem dishonorable I think he would be dishonored by the idea that he couldn't just walk into a room and have a conversation with another human being about issues of the day, or about his campaign or whatever. But anyway, yeah, dishonorable.
Yeah. So I mean, all of these different issues that we're talking about tonight all coalesce into, and then they should say to people, like, you know what? And I guess this is the hard part of anybody who's mindful or introspective. You always, and people who are progressives are usually like that, and they check themselves, and that's a good thing. But at some point, you need to say, okay, I have checked this. I've looked at it again. I've evaluated the situation, and then I've double checked, and it's happening. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
What you think is happening is happening. Canada is being mistreated. We are living through probably the worst government that Canada has ever seen. This majority parliament under Stephen Harper is going to destroy our country.
Yep. And I think we need to be, this is the whole reason we're doing this show, is just whatever way we can do, make a small contribution to preparing the Canadian people and ourselves for the next election, where we have to take this country back. We cannot survive as a constitutional democracy another majority term of Stephen Harper. We can't even let him sit in a minority parliament to be a caretaker of all the changes he's made, right? Because as long as he has even a minority power, no one can step in and undo the things he's done very easily, that is. You know what I mean?
And in fact, a minority Stephen Harper government after a majority will be, in my guess anyways, something totally different than a minority government before he got a majority. We think we've seen them obstruct Parliament now. They will get so childish and so irrational that Parliament will become completely dysfunctional under a minority conservative setting. And even though I prefer minority governments, that's what I expect of this party. That's what I would expect to see.
Mike, I got a question for you, and it's going to may sound a little silly, but I mean it seriously. Can we have a fair election in Canada next time around? Will we be able to do that? And the reason I ask you this is because the second chief of Elections Canada who has run afoul of the Conservative Party by investigating them for election fraud has, quote, resigned, unquote, whatever
I'm
that
glad
means.
we're getting to this. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it has to be a question now. Stephen Harper is giving us like the full spectrum of everything that we've looked at the Americans for how long, and we find, you guys are doing everything all ass backwards and crazy. We look back at them and we go, Richard Nixon was so controlling and centralizing of power and always hiding everything and always covering everything up. We get that from Stephen Harper. We've seen George Bush steal elections in the United States, and now we've seen Stephen Harper do the same thing in Canada. Yeah. And like you said, the elections chief resigns 1 year before his tenure is over. 1 year. And you know what else bothers me a lot about this, Tony? When it's covered in the media, they don't even start by coming from an objective place. They don't ask how this might relate to the robocall scandal and if it benefits the Conservatives. In fact, they go the exact opposite, and they say things like, also, just so you know, this has nothing to do with the Conservatives being worried about being investigated. And that's the kind of thing that really bothers me. I mean, why did you have to say that? If you're not gonna ask hard questions, why are you going to be so soft like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an example of the veil being removed, and we see a glimpse of the real agenda that most of the media in Canada has, including the CBC. You're specifically referring to a CBC article, right?
I think it was on the CBC. Almost every article that I read that talked about the resignation of the I forget the elections official's name, the head of Elections Canada, but almost everyone was quick to. They would report that, okay, he's resigning. Yes, it's in the middle of a scandal. No, it has nothing to do with the Conservatives wanting him out. And to me, that is shoddy, because again, like you said earlier, this we're not speculating that it absolutely was, but we're saying it's wrong to say that it wasn't. No one has asked the questions yet. No one has bothered to check.
Right. We'll never know, because guess what? The chief of Elections Canada's name is William Corbett. He hasn't.
Oh yeah, the new guy.
Right.
Is this the new guy?
You know who? Yeah. No, the guy who resigned right. Oh no, hang on a second.
Oh, okay.
The guy who resigned right now, his name was William Corbett. Okay.
Okay.
Now, he was also the guy, and this harkens us back again to the speech that Ignatieff made, right? Wherein he said, remember when he said the Veterans Ombudsman was fired for criticizing Conservative policy, and how
he was being too much of a hard ass. He was
being a hard ass.
He was
doing his job, sticking up for veterans, right? Because they're coming back to Canada with their minds all mangled and not getting taken care of and
not being treated properly.
Yeah,
absolutely, right.
Yeah.
So he did something, or he tried to do something about it.
He pointed it out, and he said something needs to be done about this, And then the Conservatives said, "Oh yeah, okay. Well, here's what we'll do. We'll fire you because you're too loud." You know what I mean?
Right.
And then they replaced him with a gentleman, okay, who immediately took up the role and says, "Well, my plan to do this job is to be very, very non-confrontational with the government of the day, which is Stephen Harper's government."
Yeah. I'm not going to kick anybody in the balls here.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Except for a whole bunch of veterans. I mean,
exactly, man.
Who just went over to Afghanistan, and fought and saw people die, killed people, had probably a hell of a fucking horrible time. Those people, I'm not going to stand up for those people. I'm just gonna toe the line here.
Exactly.
And this is the fella who is now in charge of the election investigation.
Exactly. And I'm just pulling up his name right now because the Conservatives seem to be putting him into positions to do damage control for them. Okay, the name of the guy is Yves Cote. He's the former Associate Deputy Minister of Justice under Rob Nichols.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he was a bureaucrat assigned to MP Rob Nichols' justice portfolio.
Yeah. So let's just put it this way. A former member of the Stephen Harper government is now running Elections Canada and presiding over all of the 700 investigations that are going on right now pertaining to election fraud.
And of course, the other thing they always point out too is, it was Mark Mayrand who had the final decision. So that also kind of should make everything okay, because Mark Mayrand gave Stephen Harper a little bit of a hard time.
Let's just not kid ourselves here. This is Stephen Harper's appointee.
Yeah.
This is not the first time that Yves Cote has been put into a position to do damage control for the Conservatives, and I expect that this is what he's in Elections Canada to do right now. I think when we see Parliament resume, we're not going to hear so much about these ridiculous investigations. We have Dean Del Mastro, deep hot water, man. And what's going to happen to that? Without diverging into that right now, what do you expect a whitewash? I'm going to predict a whitewash. I'm just going to come out of the blue and say, yeah, I think this is going to be a whitewash.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I'd just like to say about the new Yves Cote, is that his name?
Yeah.
The other thing was that when they were doing the hiring process, there's a point system, and there were no points awarded. There was not a single category for investigative skills.
So it reminds me of the F-35 thing, right? So I want to buy a Big Mac, but I have to go through this process so that I can procure a Big Mac and look like it was a process, like an unbiased process that allowed me to do it. But I can jerry-rig the process, like the qualities that I'm looking for in a hamburger, right? So, I'm going to, in an unbiased way, procure a hamburger, but I want it to be a Big Mac. So